Hi everyone, I'm Chris Walker. I'm the Behavioural Insights lead here at Voicescape, and I'm going to take you through a quick look at Former Tenant Arrears collection through a behavioural science lens so that we can try to understand why it is that former tenants aren't engaging and show how the use of technology can positively impact engagement. To do this, I'm going to use a behavioural science framework called BMAT to help structure our thinking around former tenant arrears. So BMAT was created by the founder of Stanford University's Persuasive Technology Lab. So not only is it a well-established model of human behavior, but its simplicity provides a really nice practical framework for thinking about behavior and how we can create effective behavior change interventions. So using the BMAT model allows us to identify the current in-context barriers that prohibit the target behavior that we're looking to change. It also facilitates executional ideas to steer people towards the desired behavior that we're looking for. And then finally, it also creates a framework for identifying and incorporating last mile nudges that prompt behavior change. So what this last benefit means is that it helps us to think of ways in which we can tweak or supplement our existing processes without having to make whole-scale process changes. So what does BMAT stand for, and how can we use it in the context of former tenant arrears? So essentially, BMAT is an equation which says that behavior requires three things. It requires motivation, it requires ability, and it requires a trigger. So when it comes to arrears collection for former tenants, we often think about behavior, the behavior in question, as paying off that arrear. However, before someone is in a position to make a payment towards their arrear, the first thing they do is they need to engage with us. Now, we can sometimes bundle these together so that we both achieve engagement and payment with one intervention, but oftentimes it'll take multiple engagements to secure that full payment. So it's useful to think of these behaviors as two separate problems. So thinking about motivation in relation to former tenant arrears engagement, we can start to drill down into some of the drivers of engagement from these tenants. So an obvious first example would be that landlord-tenant relationship. So what was their experience during their tenancy? Do they trust you as a landlord, and do they think of you as a fair landlord? But alternatively, we can think about it in terms of, are they sticking their head in the sand and trying to avoid dealing with the current situation? So why might this be? Do they feel ashamed? Are they worried about the consequences of engagement? Or is it that they're possibly not worried about the consequences of engagement? So do they feel that there'll be no impact if they just continue to not engage? And there's also the potential that they might have a misperception about what happens when you're no longer a tenant. It's possible that they see non-payment after you leave as normal, and by proxy, disengagement may also be seen as the norm. So similarly, we can also think about some of the ability reasons why tenants aren't engaging, along with these motivation reasons. So in terms of engagement, we can think of ability in terms of different ways. So we can think about it in terms of time. So this can be in relation to the length of the process, but it can also be in terms of how busy people are. So are we engaging at the right moment? We also want to think about ability in terms of ease. So for example, how easy is it for the tenant to speak to the right person to deal with their situation? So do they have to phone a general number and then speak to a customer services advisor, who will then pass them on to the income team, who will then redirect them to speak to the right person? So having multiple steps like this in the process makes it much less fluid. I'm sure we can all think of times when we've had this experience and it's left us feeling frustrated, and times when we've eventually been put through to the right person and it's been a much more difficult conversation than it might have otherwise needed to be, or times when we simply just didn't have the motivation to stay on the line and we would hang up the call. And then finally, the last sort of way of thinking about ability would be in terms of psychological capability of the individual who's engaging. So financial hardship is stressful, and this impacts our decision-making. So tasks or processes that might be seen as easy to do under normal circumstances can become much more difficult or daunting or even anxiety-provoking. Again, what we want to do is simplify these and make the behavior as easy as we can to ensure that everyone has the psychological capability to action it. So for an engagement to be successful, we need to ensure that that motivation is high enough or that ability is high enough. But we also need that important third ingredient, which is an effective trigger. So we can think of two triggers that help to tackle the lack of motivation or ability, and then a third trigger that will help when both of these are sufficiently high enough. So when we've got sufficiently high motivation and sufficiently high ability. So the first trigger is a facilitator, which is when motivation is high but ability is low. So this trigger essentially provides a leg up to help people complete that behavior. So let's take that psychological capability example. So say if you've written a letter to the former tenant, providing them with all the details of their situation and steps they need to complete this, but the letter is 2 pages long and it's overly verbose. So it might provide everything that the tenant needs to know, but it also requires a lot of cognitive processing to sit down and read through this. So our brains typically prefer to function on autopilot if they can. So redesigning this letter to make it simple, using plain English and potentially using visuals to highlight important aspects will help this engagement act as a facilitator because it makes completing that behavior much easier. Secondly, we can think of sparks. So these are the opposite of facilitators when motivation is low, but the ability is high. So I mentioned that tenants' motivation for engagement may be low because they may feel ashamed. So is there anything that we can do as part of our engagement techniques to try and minimize this feeling and let them know that they'll be supported and that you're there to help them when they get on that call? Finally, we have signals. So this is when motivation and ability are both high. Essentially, these functions as reminders or prompts. A lot of the time when we fail to do something, it's simply because we've forgotten, not because we don't want to or don't have the ability to engage. So creating simple reminders can be a great way to signal tenants of the behavior that they need to complete. So I mentioned at the start that I'd highlight how technology could impact engagement using this approach, and how BMAT provided a framework that allowed us to supplement existing processes without changing them root and branch. So I'll give you a quick example in relation to our collections for former tenant arrears technology. So one of the key benefits of this technology is it is able to cover all 3 types of triggers required to facilitate behavior change. So if we think firstly in terms of facilitator triggers, we can maximize issues of time, ease, and psychological capability by sending an outbound automated call at the right time that transfers the tenant directly to the person that they need to speak to, following a short and simple message that provides that tenant with a clear understanding about the context of the call. So in doing so, giving them that leg up to complete that behavior. Then in terms of sparks, to increase motivation, we can think about tailoring the messages of these automated calls to address those drivers of engagement. So I mentioned the example of tenants who may be feeling ashamed, but similarly, messages could be designed to address other drivers such as concerns over the consequences or the potential impacts or losses associated with continued disengagement, and then also messages that trigger that sort of social norms to realign any misperceptions they may have about non-payment or disengagement. And then finally, one of the advantages of using technology is the efficiency gain associated with staff not having to manually call tenants. Therefore, by virtue of being able to engage with large numbers with ease, many of these calls will act as signals themselves. They'll prompt tenants to engage who may have otherwise forgotten or had got distracted. Finally, before I pass over to some of our clients who are able to flesh out some of these ideas, the use of technology has its advantages beyond engaging with tenants. It can help to overcome some of the organizational issues around motivation and ability. So for example, I mentioned how technologies provide efficiencies which can help act as a signal for tenants. But similarly, this efficiency gain acts as a facilitator for organizations. It does so by reducing the labor-intensive duties of staff and therefore raising their ability to maximize engagement, and in this particular case, process payments for former tenants. And it does so by prioritizing their time and energy, allowing them to facilitate and prioritize actions that require that human touch rather than the duties that can be carried out by automation. And then finally, in terms of providing that spark, an increase in motivation by reducing these more boring or labor-intensive tasks, staff can prioritize having conversations with tenants who actually want to speak to them. So this also has positive benefits in terms of that landlord-tenant relationship, as staff have more time to fully engage with customers and create tailored solutions to their particular needs. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of former tenant arrears collection through the lens of behavioural science, and gives you a framework for tackling your own former tenant arrears, as well as highlighting how technology can transform this process. I'll now pass over to some of our clients who can speak to their own experience of the benefits of using technology and hopefully expand on some of the points I've highlighted. Thank you.
Thanks for that. My name is Caroline Spiers and I am head of credit control here at 13. I've worked at 13 since 2014. That was from previous stock transfers from local authorities through various mergers, and now 13. So a total of 23 years housing and income experience from me. But today is all about former tenant debt arrears and how we have been able to use technology in supporting us maximising our income. When I was appointed in my current role in November 2018, I did a lot of research and collected lots of information around communicating with our customers. And I want to look at the how we were communicating, when we were communicating and why. And also a partnership working internally and where that all fits in together. So I started with the how, mainly our written communication, what was the structure of our letters and how effective were they. The letters weren't generating much response from customers. So I tried sending out invoices instead, see what reaction that would gain. I started to increase responses from customers. We then brought these invoice style demands for payment in line with the nudge theory that was in our letters, which lets customers know what will happen next if they don't pay and respond to how to pay, etc. As part of this research, I also needed to know the when. I analysed how far after the end of a tenancy we were likely to collect the debt. So from this, I created a heat map which showed that the debt was its hottest within 6 months of the customer leaving us. So that was when we were most likely to be able to collect it. After that, it was usually only when the customers were needing to be rehoused. To round off that research, I looked at the why. So why were we holding on to debt that we are unlikely to collect? I obtained some detailed data on our entire former tenant portfolio from Experian. This gave me the propensity ratings and likelihood of being able to collect the debt based on that customer's current circumstances. From these pieces of research, we changed the recovery process. Our aim is to engage and take payments and make arrangements with customers who leave us with debt within a 6-month period. We no longer send letters at all, only invoices. We have cut the waste out of our processes and tried to pursue debt within its first 6 months. We're also able to use this research for leadership, which allowed us to clear the decks for technology, clear the decks for a large write-off to allow the technology support to come in. So following these simple changes, we looked at how could technology help the team engage customers and collect even more debt. Our partnership working across the organisation is also key to supporting the team in its recovery of former tenant debt by ensuring that our colleagues in the operation teams are doing everything they can to keep the debt low and the quality of information high. This gives the former team a better chance at collecting it when it comes across. We work very closely together to ensure that the housekeeping of the accounts are clear and accurate. And to support the technology of the data, it needs to be clear in the system, as this starts way before the tenancy goes through its termination process. It's around the key information on the customer's circumstances and if they work and where, who's in the property and what are their circumstances, and how does the customer normally make their payments, what is the history of the arrangements, and what patterns does this throw back at us. The process also comes together at the point of the customer handing in the notice to end the tenancy. Both teams engage with each other to ensure the information is correct and accurate, including forwarding address details and contact numbers. At this point, the former tenant team start to engage that customer around any debt that may be left on the account and start to build that relationship while the customer is still in their tenancy, giving them a much better chance at collecting that debt. So the technology side, when you tell the team you are looking at software and technology, there's always some colleagues who are terrified of the change or even fear that this could result in a job loss. So from the very beginning, I always wanted the team to be involved in what we were doing and feel secure that what we were investing in was to increase their capacity to be able to speak to customers. There's all the clever wording of letters or invoices and technology. It can only get you to engage the customer, but once that happens, it's the person and the colleague on the other end of the phone that ensures the negotiation to secure the payment. I wanted the team to continue to feel valued, but understand that we need to keep striving for better and how we can collect more money with the same resources. So the first piece of software we invested in was back in 2018 with Mobisoft. This piece of technology helps the team have a clear line of sight of the caseload and reduces the number of cases that they need to focus on by removing some into non-contact rules. That's stuff that's waiting to be written off or awaiting trace information. The team can then focus on the priority 1 cases, and that's those customers who are under the notice period. We have found that we are able to engage these and build relationships with them before they leave us. I think it would help us more to see the priority rules in line with the age of the debt, and that comes in line with their internal heat map. When we invested in Voicescape in May 2019 with a go live date of mid-June 2019, that hit us with an absolute huge bang to our income collection. The initial response was massive and received over 400 calls in our first week. The phones were off the hook and the team could not believe what was happening. It was really exciting. I was also glued to that dashboard watching the calls go up and our increased collection rates. That first month was shot up by 32%. By that year, at year end, we'd levelled out at an overall 18% increase on the previous year. As we moved into lockdown though, we stopped collecting the former tenant debt and supported our housing colleagues. By everyone focusing on the current debt, this impacted our former collection rates, so we weren't able to load Voicescape and get those calls coming back in. At week 12, leadership agreed that we could move the team back onto the former debt. And at that point, our weekly collection rates had increased from the previous year, which was £8,700 a week, to £9,500 a week. So how did we do this during a pandemic? So last year, to support the team and continue to make them feel in control of the workload and the calls, we handed over the full access to Voicescape portal to the team. They decided what to load and when to start and pause it. They're able to call back much quicker than waiting for the manager to send them a report for any calls that might have failed or dropped off or that they weren't able to answer quick enough. They're able to pause it, that, and then when they're caught back up, they restart the calls again. But most importantly, they feel in control. They are really excited about the calls on the board, and the same way I was that very first week when we just introduced it. They discuss in their team meetings the cases to load and have started to think of better ways of doing things, such as campaigns. They know the targets and achievements and are competitive and excited each month to show that they can always do better. Giving the team full access has also helped with the housekeeping of the contact details. They're able to update the system and the housing management on the calls that are failing. So last year we also introduced the first robot to our process, that is an RPA worker to our income process in the former tenant debt. Our little bot, it now runs through the administration side. It looks for the invoices that need to be sent each day, and it sends them to print and updates the housing management system. So that alone has saved our team 325 hours on just printing alone. We're still working out through this at the company, but it's clear that it definitely saves time on duties that the team can then spend putting more calls through Voicescape and bringing in the income. So what did that achieve? At the year end, we had received over 1.13 million in new former debt during the pandemic. However, we had collected 381k over the 40 weeks. That's 9.5k per week and 33% of the new debt created. But really, the big figure is that we collected 16% of our gross former debt last year. So without making the changes that we did by making our recovery process leaner and investing in the new technology, we would never have been able to reach out to customers like we do without Voicescape. This was the key piece of the puzzle for us. So without this, the team would have had a great lean process with clever technology that told them what to look at, but would have still had the manual bound dialing that was soul breaking for them. So now they're motivated about what calls to load up for the week, as they're only taking calls from customers that they want to engage, and they're able to put their negotiation skills to the test to see how much income they can collect. We have been able to continue, had we been able to continue recovery action on former debt during the first 12 weeks, and at the rate that we saw that we did collect last year of the 9.5k, we could have achieved in a year in total 495k, which would have been an increase on pre-Voicescape of 29% of our collection rate. So our motivation this year is to hit that target and continue to achieve more. In terms of value for money, we are more efficient than we've ever been with leaner processes and better technology. We are more economic in how we do things, showing an outstanding return on investment. And the outcome has proven that these changes have been the most effective we have seen yet. So what's next for us here? As with everybody else, we're always looking to improve our ways of working and collect more income from former debt. We're currently looking at the impacts of the pandemic on customer debt and how that will move across to the former team. We've seen an increase in debt for our eviction cases, and the first cases we've seen through have had an average of over £7,000 by the time the warrant has been issued. So we are currently discussing different ways of being able to recover this debt and the likelihood and the impact on our bad debt provisions. We're also looking at payment solutions for customers and how to make things better and easier. For example, I like to pay by Apple Pay and use fingerprint or face recognition technology wherever I can, as do many people, including our customers. So we're looking at how can we replicate this for customers and make it easy to make a payment to us. Also, how can we be able to make payments much more easily and quicker back to them? And then how do we incorporate that into My13, which is our customer self-service portal? But one of the big things that we are committed to doing this year is that continued partnership with Voicescape. We have recently completed a behavioural science study and looked at the risks of recovery action and doing something against doing nothing at all, and what action gets a reaction from customers. So following this study, we began working on a very exciting automation project based around those risk principles, but also understanding what the best contact method is for the individual customer and the best time of the day to reach out to them to maximise our opportunity to engage and at what time that suits them, giving you an optimum chance of collecting that payment. The first signs of the project are really exciting, and we're looking forward to going live over the next few weeks with phase 1. So hopefully I will have some more exciting news to share after that date. So I'd just like to thank you for inviting me to discuss this, and happy to answer any questions at the end. If you want to put those into the questions sections, we will come back to you with that. Thanks again for your time.
Hi, I'm Paula Jenner from Citizen Housing, Head of Income, and here to talk to you about former tenant arrears and certainly Citizen's approach to former tenant arrears. As an organisation, we were formed out of 3 legacy organisations that were previously under the same umbrella, September 2019. Just because we were under the same umbrella organisation, it didn't mean that we had one way of doing everything. There were 3 or more, in some cases, approaches to our former tenant arrears recovery. We had no dedicated staff and resource, and because we knew we had more to do with current arrears, this meant that former tenant arrears was far down the priority list of arrears recovery. And I'm sure there's lots of other organisations in the same boat and scratching their heads about kind of where to start with this, because it does feel a little bit daunting. We were daunted too. We had no overview of the debt escalation, particularly the debt breakdown stages. And at that point, we had what I would consider an over-reliance on external debt collection agents. We were referring debt to collection agents without doing anything ourselves before we referred it on to them. And we also had a history of large one-off debt write-off exercises. So we'd done a number of, we'd done that a number of times to kind of clear the decks down, but never really got through the full housekeeping kind of task that was there with the existing debt and how to approach it. So what did we do? Well, we needed a new proactive approach. We knew we needed to make early contact with customers, and so we documented a revised process and procedure, and we ensured that the former tenant arrears work was prioritised on a weekly basis. It wasn't just something that we pick up and drop when we thought we had enough resources. It was something that we wanted to weave through our kind of overall workload. We knew we needed to correctly review every debt to categorise the stage that it was sat at or what we thought we could do with it. We really needed to consider if debt truly was irrecoverable. Were we just progressing write-off actions because of the age of the debt? But we knew, because of the amount of work that we had to progress, that we needed to harness technology in order to make all of the activities efficient as possible. And that's where Voicescape came in, really. So in terms of what does that weekly workload look like, through from June 2020 to June 2021, we started to harness Voicescape to help us with that outbound calling. And over that period, there was over 3,000 attempted outbound calls made specifically around former tenant arrears. Now, customers would engage with those calls directly or ring back later. And the overall call conversion of those was 27%. So 27% of those, over 3,000 calls were customers who then had a conversation with us about that debt. Where a call wasn't connected, voicemails and text messages were progressed, and they had specific former tenant arrears narrative attached to them, being quite clear with the customer about the reason for the call. We did have some early success with cases that hadn't been previously progressed in a proactive manner, where just because we'd rang and made contact with them, a certain chunk of customers were expecting a call from us at some point and had actually been surprised that we hadn't engaged with them in a more proactive way. So we did have, in the first few months, quite a few little windfalls of customers who settled the entire kind of debt at the point we asked for it, which was quite nice. We had quite a lot of positive feedback from, particularly from staff and from customers. Staff have a clear direction about our approach for former tenant arrears, and they've been involved in the direction of travel for use of Voicescape with our current arrears for our low-level debts, but also watch the progress of how we've deployed the use of that sort of technology. Staff can clearly see the benefits of using technology, so they're not wasting time, going down a list of telephone numbers to make contact with customers. What we're doing is protecting their time so that they engage with a conversation where a customer has actually picked up the call and wants to engage with us. They find it quick and easy to use as a system. It's quite intuitive, and we have a performance dashboard available that shows us the trend and the movement through the workload each week. From a customer's perspective, as I've already mentioned, they, by and large, they were expecting our contact, certainly for some of them, but for others that had their head in their sand, they didn't want to make a payment. They then realised that debt wasn't going to go away, and so we were able to secure quite a lot of agreements out of that. We're also starting to get some customer feedback available via our internal customer excellence platform. Now, we haven't segmented that to separate out the difference between current and former arrears. So it's something on my to-do list going forward, but they're treated the same, and our performance is really, really positive. Customers can give a score out of 5, and by and large our calls come through specifically for income calls at 4.7 to 4.8 on a weekly basis. So we know there's nothing jumping out in terms of customer feedback, even though a chunk of those customers are conversations around paying your old debt. Key performance indicators. Now, when I've listened to any landlord talk about what they've done, the first question I ask is what their performance is. So what I've quoted here is the former tenant arrears performance. But as a little backdrop, what I can tell you is that our current arrears performance dropped by over a full percent at the end of the last financial year compared to the previous year. So, we've really started to see an impact of our whole proactive approach across the board, but particularly looking at former tenant arrears as a percentage of the annual debt. You can see there that there was a massive reduction between 1920 and the end of the financial year 2021. However, that directly links to an increase in the amount of debt that we wrote off as irrecoverable. And so the two go hand in hand, really. But when you look at the percentage of our rent collected, looking at both current and former arrears, again, you can see a real positive direction of travel between the 2 years, but again, can be connected to how much debt we've written off. Now, we don't expect to write that amount of debt off going forward. We expect that figure to kind of even out on a monthly basis now, rather than big one-off write-off exercises going forward. In terms of just a comparison, we know that last financial year, we were progressing an awful lot of housekeeping with former tenant debt. We had to recategorise a lot of cases, consider, was the debt still recoverable? But from this financial year, we can already start to see a bit of a difference. Comparing last Q1 in the last financial year with this Q1, we've had an increase of 81% in that debt recovery, which equates to 84k. Now, the road ahead is an interesting one, because this year we will have some bigger debts moving across to former tenant arrears. You know, we've seen an increase in evictions so far this quarter, cases that perhaps might have been abandoned, or cases where they needed to progress to eviction, a couple of cases where customers actually were no longer there and had moved abroad, affected by the pandemic perhaps, but we did have some cases where they were carrying high arrears. So it is going to be interesting to see what the trend looks like throughout the rest of this financial year. In terms of the lessons learned, it's quite a few of them. A lot of them you could argue would be kind of gut instinct for those of you working within kind of rent arrears in social housing. Don't let the debt occur in the first place. You know, we conducted audits of new cases, new former tenant arrears cases, and by doing that, by carrying out those audits, we were able to unpick some key areas where we thought we could get tighter. And so now we carry out proactive action at pre-termination wherever possible. So if there's a termination date being entered into the system, you know, for 4 weeks' time, they've given their notice, we will start to make proactive action through that 4-week period to try and minimise the risk of that debt kind of appearing in the first place. Harnessing best practices. There's an HQN toolkit that we found very useful. And at the start of this journey, we kind of wanted to understand, you know, what could we be doing? And the HQN toolkit that's available, you know, on their website looks fairly lengthy when you first look at it, but we found it invaluable, really. And our intention is we'll continue to review that, and hopefully whittle down how many other things we could incorporate into our process. We now ensure that the former tenant arrears workload is progressed on a weekly basis. It's not just when we've got available staffing. We're never in a position where we've got people twiddling their thumbs. I'm sure everybody else is in the same position. And so what we do now is class that as part of our weekly workload, because it's only by doing that that you then attack that work throughout the whole financial year. Customer contact numbers. This sounds really obvious, but they usually remain unchanged. You know their moving address because they've left your property. You know, don't often get a forwarding address to work with. And so when you're posting contacts out, quite often you're not sure that they're still at that property, but telephone numbers remain unchanged. So the use of mobile technology, Voicescape technology or contact technology through telephone numbers, for me, is absolutely got to be the way to go. Largely customers are expecting to be contacted, but also consider the effectiveness and efficiency of processes when you're setting out kind of a new strategy. You know, the Rolls-Royce approach would be to manually attempt to contact every single customer, but we couldn't afford to do that. We knew we didn't have the time to do that. That would detract from our approach to current tenant arrears. So considering, is it effective, but actually is it efficient to take that approach, was really key for us. And I touched on it earlier. progress regular audits. You really need to kind of reflect findings from the audits. Are staff progressing things in the way that you wanted them to? Is there anything you need to tinker with? Is there anything you need to change going forward? And so, you know, we really try to have an iterative approach to that new procedure and process that we set up. And it's been changed a number of times since we set up that original document over a year ago. And we've got some next steps. There's quite a few of them still. You know, we're not where we want to be. It really is a direction of travel. So some of our next steps, you can see them up on the slide there. Considering external debt collection, you know, this isn't a right or a wrong, and a lot of organisations might still use the external debt collection companies. We still do. It's just we try to minimise that activity because we can do some of this debt collection activity ourselves. But also, is there a potential for cases to be referred to court? You know, there is a small claims court that we could still progress cases to, and that could be something that we think about going forward. There's a new best practice former tenant arrears group that we attended recently with 13 group, and the intention is to meet on a quarterly basis to share, you know, what we've made work, what we've tried, and perhaps we don't want to make work going forward. And so it's that best practice group and things like that that we really will enable us to kind of share ideas and embed them in our process going forward. Internally, we use the MIS system, and we know that there's probably a little bit more enhancement that we can do, and we're hoping that over the next couple of months, some of that will have been progressed, which will again just increase the efficiency of staff working with former tenant arrears cases. And we're also hoping to embed a new proactive arrears module within our MIS system, which will give us greater opportunity to highlight high risk cases. And again, this, you know, it's fairly obvious stuff. You know, it's the system being able to kind of pull through cases that really need to be prioritised over other former tenant arrears. And so we think that this new module will help us do that. The use of recurring card payments via All Pay is something that we're hoping to get embedded within the next month. And for customers who perhaps don't want to sign up to a direct debit because of potential bank charges, if they haven't got the funds to meet the direct debit, this payment option could be a solution for them. And basically will just save them the time and expense of calling up to make a payment over the phone each week. Which again would increase efficiencies for us, but kind of secures that payment going forward unless the transaction can't be covered by their funds. We do anticipate a reduction in our external debt agent charges because we're doing more recovery action ourselves. So we haven't yet realised that, but we're hoping over this financial year that we will certainly see a reduction in that. And we're hoping, obviously, that our recovery arrears will increase and that will secure a bigger recovery over the next 2 years. But like everything in income at the moment, it's continually evolving. And because we've had a little pot of cases that have been evicted with quite high arrears, you know, we're going to just have to keep a watching brief on that. But we do know that we've got our cases into the best possible position they can be in terms of the trigger points that they're at and the process that we're currently following. So really, we know we're still not the best that we can be. We know we've got more work to do, but we're really proud of the investment we've put into it, particularly over the last financial year. So it's just a watch and brief to see what that leads to. Thank you for listening. I hope it's provided some information of interest and kind of open to anybody who kind of wants to speak to me separately or fire away with any questions. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm not sure whether my camera is working or not. It doesn't appear to be, so apologies for that. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Caroline and Paula and Chris. Fascinating talks there. Let me just see whether I can actually get my camera to work. It doesn't appear to be. Regardless, you don't need to see me. I wanted to thank you all for the participation throughout this event. There's been loads of chat, loads of questions asked as well. The first line of questions has been asked a couple of times, so I thought I'd just kick off and respond to that, which is, what does Voicescape actually do? And what I've actually got is a little presentation that I can share with you that explains exactly what it is that Voicescape does. We're an engagement platform. So there are several reasons why a social landlord might want to engage with a tenant throughout their tenancy. It could be having a conversation. It might be gathering some feedback from repairs and maintenance. It could be setting up an appointment, you know, gas, electrical compliance, things like that, or even just a keeping in touch check-in. Or it might be checking in with elderly, vulnerable, independent living tenants, but in this instance it's typically relating to rent and collections and things like failed direct debits and former arrears and arrangements and things like that. So, but it's quite time consuming. So what Voicescape does, and as all of the speakers have talked to, it generates operational efficiency. So through our engagement platform, what we will do is take your list. There's a few questions around what systems we work with. The short answer is any system. We work with all of the major housing management system providers. We can take former tenant arrears lists from any of your finance platforms, even just a spreadsheet. So we're data agnostic, we're telephony platform agnostic, i.e. we can work with any of your platforms. Someone's asking whether there's still sound working. I don't know whether anyone can actually hear me right now. So if someone could just let me know in the chat whether they can actually hear me, that would be great. So everyone can hear. Good. Okay. So what happens is we start calling your former tenants, and the first thing that they hear is a pre-recorded message. Hello, this is your landlord, Hudson Housing. We'd like to speak with you about how your former tenant debt is paid. We can help you today. Please press 1 to transfer through to an officer now. This call is free of charge, or something like that. So they'll then press 1 and transfer through to your former tenant team. And that's the ideal scenario. But if that doesn't work, then what we'll do is we'll leave a voicemail. We'll send a text message asking them to call back. And when they do call back, we'll know who it is. We'll let the officer know it's Mr. Smith calling back, and we'll transfer them through. Now, what we are is positively persistent. So if we're not able to engage with them on a Monday, we'll try again on a Tuesday and we'll leave a voicemail and a text message. And then we'll try again on a Wednesday and leave a voicemail and a text message. So we'll try that repeatedly throughout the week, throughout the month, to engage. And that's where Voicescape has great success, because what we're able to do over and above an officer is repeatedly try hundreds of people every single day. That said, you're able to control the volume of calls coming in. It's something I'm going to ask Caroline to talk to in a moment. So the benefits of the Voicescape platform, with driving huge operational efficiencies, your typically limited resources for FTA collection will automatically be turbocharged. There'll be the amount of work that they're able to do will significantly increase, and that allows them to maximize the impact of those calls. They'll be able to do much more debt signposting. They'll be able to do much more welfare support and increase their collections. So by connecting with many more tenants, you're increasing the engagement levels across the tenancy base and the former tenant base. But with that, and this was a question that came up in the questions tab, we're also supporting the mental health and well-being of staff. You know, it's a really tough job that we're asking our team members to do, and typically they're doing that in isolation, at home, on the dining table, in the spare bedroom, without the camaraderie of their team around them. So if we're just able to provide them with a warm, steady stream of inbound conversations, it makes it a much easier, nicer job to do. And I'm sure Caroline will touch on that momentarily. Just a few of the landlords we work with. It's almost 50 social landlords that we work with now, large and small, up and down the UK. I'm sure many of those will be peers. I've noticed a few of them on the call today, some of our clients on the call today, so I'm sure they'll be happy to speak with you about their experience in due course. So I just wanted to have a quick review of the polls today. So the first poll was, how challenging do you anticipate 2022 to be? Just pipping the win there, more challenging. 50% people said they'll find it more challenging. 18 people, so 47%, said equally challenging, and just one person, representing 3% of the votes, suggesting that this coming year will be less challenging than last. It'd be interesting to find out why they felt that. Second poll was your current biggest challenge for collecting former tenant arrears. The number one response, with 52% of the votes, was difficult to get hold of former tenants. Absolutely, that's it. You know, if it's difficult collecting current tenant arrears, then we all know it's 10 times as hard collecting from former tenants. It's just engaging them on the phone that's a particular challenge, and I'm hoping that Caroline and Paula have talked to how Voicescape has helped them with that. The second response was they don't have enough resource. Again, you know, we've talked about the operational efficiencies that Voicescape can drive, supporting that, and 6% of the votes suggesting that their organisation has no strategic goal for FTA. Let's see if we can help you push that up the agenda. A number of other questions. Now I can see that Caroline has been answering these as we go, but Caroline, if I could ask you to dive back into the call right now. The first question, there's lots of them being asked here about different systems use, and I know that, Caroline, you've got a best practice group that you've set up with peers. Do you want to tell people a bit about that group and how they can get involved?
Sure. So following me talking about former tenant arrears at the network, the income networking group, I was asked a lot about former tenant, what we do, can they see what we do. So on the back of that, we've set up an FTA best practice group, because we feel everybody is feeling the same pain. So that group had its first meeting in September, and it was fab. It really took off. So if our next meeting's in November, so if anyone wants to join that, please send me your details and I'll add you to the group, because that's where we will share lots of what's going on. I demoed Voicescape for the group the first time around. Happy to share that again for people that want to see how we use it live. We share, and you know, things like, what does our invoices look like that we send out? There's lots going on in those sessions, and we actually didn't even have enough time last time. So if anybody wants to join that, this may be the platform for you, especially if you're new to FTA collection. Lots of ideas, not just mine, not just Paula's, but lots across nationally, not just in the Northeast here, but nationally. It's been a great platform to reach out across the whole country.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's lots of regional benchmarking that takes place, but actually hearing from peers up and down the UK has been really beneficial, as you've just said. Someone asking here, Caroline, about how many people do you have in your team? And I think that's a question that a lot of people considering, you know, how many resources do I need? So can you just tell us how many you've got and put it into context with your stock level?
Sure. So we are quite a large organisation. We have 34 general needs tenancies, but we don't just manage general needs. We have shared ownership, leaseholders, student accommodation. We've got lots in commercial properties. We've got lots of different types of debt that we recover. So the former tenant team have to recover all that debt. They don't just recover general needs, we recover everything. So really, there's about 40,000 properties all in. So we recover that. There is 2 FTA working on that at any one time, and that has always been the case. Our income and cash collection has increased, and I will clearly put that down to Voicescape, because it was the only thing we changed at that point in time to have increased our cash collection. We have worked on our processes, and we have made things a little bit leaner to make it quicker for the team. But the thing that's engaging the customers and getting them to call back is by putting them through the Voicescape channel. So that's really working for us. My team don't just manage former tenant debt. I also have a court team. We manage all the possession cases, and we recover the leaseholder shared ownership type of current debt, or everything that's a little bit different from your general needs. So on a Monday and Tuesday, we sometimes use the rest of the team to pick up some of the calls, just so that we don't lose any calls. It depends how busy we are. This week it's been fairly slow, so we've only needed the 2 FTAs. But if we start to see those calls increasing, we will ask other members of the team to jump in and support that. But that can equally happen through your contact centre. If you have a contact centre, you could easily run those calls through there so that you don't lose any. It's, you know, up to you how you run, how the calls come back. We just like to keep hold of them in our team because of the conversation that that holds. It's not just always about somebody ringing up to make a payment. It's usually querying why the debt's owed and why you're chasing me now and all that stuff. So that's why the calls come directly back into our team.
Great, thank you. Another question here from Anne at Renfrewshire, and she was asking, Caroline, was there any negative PR or resistance due to the level of scam callers, and how did you deal or mitigate against that?
No, I can honestly say we have not had any negative PR. What we do find, sometimes customers won't trust the number, and I'm talking about a real handful of customers, won't be quite sure that that really is us calling them, and they will then call back the contact team. So what we've done to see how much that affects the calls is we've created a code in our housing management systems Orchard. So we've created a new code in there that is logs where a Voicescape calls come back through our contact team or come back through another way, just so we can see that difference. So that is in our system. We're able to see that those calls are still coming back because it's Voicescape that's contacted them. They've just chosen to come back through the contact centre because they don't like clicking one or touching a link. Or they haven't had any credit on their phone, so they've had to call back through someone else's phone. So that makes sure we keep an eye on those calls too.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think, Anne, just as peace of mind, and I think it's a really good question because there's lots of, you know, I receive calls every single day that aren't necessarily legitimate. We also work closely with all of our customers to publish the telephone numbers that are used on their website. So if, you know, the first thing I do if I see a telephone number on my phone that I don't recognize, I Google it. Who called me from this telephone number here? So we did a piece of work recently with Middlesbrough Council. We've published all the numbers on their website, and over a 6-month period, we tracked how many people challenged that telephone number, and it was three people. And we pointed them, they pointed them to the website. You can see that it's legitimate, and they moved on. What we also did is we started to survey how satisfied were people with the service that they were dealt with, bearing in mind this is people we're taking money from, and out of 5 the average score we received was 4.88 customer satisfaction. So it's incredibly high. The service is really well used, and we're using local telephone numbers for your tenants. We're using local regional dialect where we can as well, and we're immediately announcing and introducing the organisation that we're calling from, so adding huge levels of legitimacy to those conversations really helps support that. Couple more questions. So, all right, you've answered that. So how many FTA accounts do you have out of the 40,000 stock? And it's around 3,500, Caroline.
Yeah, we did a huge write-off at year end, and that cleared the decks a little bit for us. We were over 4,000 at 4,500. So we've cleared a little bit of that out. We're still running at 3,500 thereabouts. So yeah, quite a lot.
Okay, and actually talk to me about that, because I know it's something that yourself and Paula, I've spoken to both of you about this offline in the past, is using the data you get back from Voicescape to help write off certain debts.
Yeah, so if we have ran customers through Voicescape so many times, Voicescape's great because it gives you all that data back, how many times you've called that customer. So the team will put a note on the account saying that it's been through the Voicescape line so many times, and we've, you know, exhausted the recovery process, and that helps them move that to write off. It also helps keep your data clean. So by having the team, by me having the team manage the portal now, they're able to see the failed calls quickly. They're able to see what the invalid numbers are and keep on top of, as best they can, we'll live in 2 people, keep on top of keeping the data clean. So what numbers are failing, what we're wasting our time with. This has been through Voicescape 20 times, like why are you continuing with that? Because they're not responding, or the number's failing, whatever it is. Does it need a trace, or does it need to be moved to write off? So it really helps inform that decision making and take it to that next level.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think if you all, Caroline's popped her email address in the questions, a few of the answers, but also in the chat. So if you just want to get in touch directly with Caroline, she'll add you to that group. It's a completely independent group. We don't attend. So it's a just a sector best practice group. It's actually a bit of a spin-off from the Income Services Networking group. So again, if anyone's interested in that, I can add you to that. So it's a group that I chair. Again, it's completely independent, but I just happen to chair it at the moment. So Mohammed, can I just ask, can you pop my contact details into the bottom there? And likewise, if anybody's interested in engaging with Voicescape to understand how our services can support your collections activity, then please just feel free to contact me directly. Mohammed's going to pop my contact details into the chat. If anybody happens to be attending the CIH housing event in Manchester next week, we'll also be there, stand F12. So do pop by and say hello, or if any of your colleagues will be there, then ask them to come by and say hello to us. Let me just double check to see whether there's teen housing. Yes, we'll absolutely invite you there, Amanda. Thank you for getting in touch. Good. Well, I think I can't see any more questions coming through, but thank you very much, everybody that's engaged with us. There's going to be a follow-up email with the recording link and also answers to all of the questions. So we will circulate that in the coming days through Mohammed. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to Caroline, to Chris, and to Paula, and thank you everybody else for engaging and getting involved. It's been fantastic. So thanks all, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.